All right, today we're tackling something that I think causes a lot of us some real anxiety. When does a simple senior moment become something more? We're going to break down the absolutely crucial difference between the normal, everyday changes that happen as we age and the signs of a disease like Alzheimer's.
I mean, come on. We've all been there, right? You walk into the kitchen with a mission and then, poof, you have no idea why you're there. Or you see someone you totally know and their name is just gone. It's on the tip of your tongue, but you can't quite get it. It's a feeling we all know, but it can be a little unnerving. So where is that line? When does a simple brain fart become something to really pay attention to?
Okay, so let's get right into it. On one hand, you've got a normal memory slip. This is like you forget where you put your keys or you miss an appointment, but then later you're like, oh right, and you remember it. But on the other hand, a more concerning problem is when it's not just occasional. It's forgetting stuff you just learned or asking the same questions over and over again. And that, right there, is the huge difference we're digging into.
And look, the reason this distinction is so important comes down to this number. Alzheimer's isn't some super rare thing. It is the #1 cause of dementia, accounting for a massive 60 to 80% of all cases. I mean, that's huge. So if you want to understand dementia, you've got to understand Alzheimer's.
So before we can even begin to talk about what goes wrong with the disease like Alzheimer's, we have to establish a baseline, right? We need to know what a normal, healthy aging brain is supposed to look like. So let's start there.
And here's something that might actually surprise you, because it kind of pushes back against this big fear we all have. We tend to think of getting older as just, well, decline. Everything slows down, everything gets worse. But that's not the whole picture. Not at all. The brain is way more dynamic than that. Yeah, some things might slow down, but other things can actually get better.
Yeah, you can almost think of it as a trade-off. Sure, our processing speed might not be what it used to be. And our working memory, that mental sticky note where you hold a phone number just long enough to dial it, that might get a little less sticky. But on the flip side, things like our vocabulary and our general knowledge, those often keep expanding. And then there's that big one, wisdom. That's something that only comes with time.
But, of course, for some people, the path starts to look a little different than typical aging. There's this middle ground, this fork in the road, if you will. It's a condition called mild cognitive impairment, or MCI for short. And it's a really important place to understand.
So what is MCI? Well, the key thing here is that it involves cognitive changes that are noticeable. Like the person themselves might notice it, or their family and friends definitely do. But, and this is the absolute key, the person can still handle their day-to-day life. They can still function independently.
Now, getting an MCI diagnosis is definitely a serious risk factor, but here's where it gets really interesting. It is not a one-way ticket to dementia, not by a long shot. While yeah, about 3/4 of people with MCI will either stay at that level or progress, get this, a full 26%, that's more than 1 in 4 people, actually revert back to normal. So it's a huge warning sign for sure, but it is not a life sentence.
Okay, so now let's walk down that other path. The one for people who do progress from MCI, or who develop Alzheimer's directly. This path is different. It's a journey where the changes become more significant over time, really starting to impact daily life.
And here's a really curious fact that the research points to. In the US, it turns out women are diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease about twice as often as men. Now, part of that is because women tend to live longer, but researchers think there's more to it, that there are other biological and even genetic reasons behind this gap.
Generally, the disease moves through 3 main stages. First, there's the mild stage. Here, a person can still be pretty independent, but they might start struggling with more complex things like paying bills or following a complicated recipe. Then comes the moderate stage, which is often the longest. This is where they start needing more help with everyday activities, like getting dressed. And finally, you have the severe stage. At this point, they need constant, round-the-clock care for even the most basic things, and communication becomes incredibly difficult.
And it's not just about what's forgotten. It's also about what the brain creates. The disease can cause something called false memories. These incredibly detailed, vivid memories of things that just never happened. And you can imagine how confusing and distressing that is. It leads to real-world problems, like someone being absolutely sure they took their medicine when they didn't, or accusing someone of stealing something they just misplaced.
So, we've looked at these very different journeys, right? There's normal aging, there's MCI, and then there's Alzheimer's. Which brings us to the big so what question. Why does making these distinctions matter so much? Why is it so critical to understand the difference?
This, right here, is probably the single most important, most empowering thing to take away from all this. Aging is natural. It's a biological process. It is not a disease. Dementia, on the other hand, is a disease. It's a pathology. It is not, and I'll say it again, it is not an inevitable part of getting older. And separating those two ideas is absolutely everything when it comes to fighting stigma and pushing for better research.
And that really just leaves us with one final thought to chew on. Now that we have a clear map of the brain's potential journeys as we age, what do we do with that knowledge? How can we use this understanding to create better, more compassionate ways to support our families, our communities, and yeah, even ourselves through all the stages of life?